Welcome back, everyone. This is where we left off a few minutes ago. We are now ready to continue with radio and checkbox buttons. Both the checkbox and radio buttons make it simple for the browser user to choose from a number of different options. They're similar in that they function like little on-off switches that can be toggled by the user, and they are added using the input element. Radio buttons are added to a form with the input element with its type attributes set to radio, as you can see here. And checkboxes are also added using the input element um, with its type attribute set to checkbox. Okay, so when would you want to use one, when the other? Radio buttons are used when you want the user to select one of a limited of choice or options. And here's the syntax right underneath. The name and the value attributes are required. The value attribute is used to transmit the value of the check button to the server. And here's an example of how to set up the radio buttons. Go inside the input element, and we got two options here. Only one of them can be selected. Only one of the radio button options can be chosen. Note also that for radio buttons, the value of the name attribute is the same for all options, but the value attribute is different. So name is the same, value is different. Okay, that is a requirement for radio buttons. One more example. This one has four possible options, with one of them already pre-selected. This example uses the so-called checked attribute to pre-check a certain button, and here's the syntax for that. Okay. Alright, checkboxes. Checkboxes are used when you want the user to select one or more options of a limited number of choices. So that's the main difference. That is the difference between the two. You can see the syntax down here. The name and the value attributes are required again. The value attribute is used to transmit the value of the checked button to the server. Okay, let's see some examples. Okay, unlike the radio buttons, this time you can check multiple buttons. Alright. And note that checkboxes do not necessarily need to be used in groups. They can exist independently of each other on their own. Okay, drop-down menus, yet another control that we can use in our forms. The select element defines the drop-down menu or scrolling list of items. Essentially, it's just a container for the menu items. The name attribute is required with drop-down menus. The option element names each menu item, and one option element is used for each item in the list. The content of the chosen option element is what gets passed to the server when the form is transmitted. Here's one more example. These are the menu items in this particular case. We got four of them. By default, just a single item is chosen from the list. Using the attribute multiple equals multiple in the select element indicates that multiple options may be selected. Scrolling menus. To make the menu display as a scrolling list, simply specify the number of lines you would like to be visible using the size attribute in the select element. Right there. So for example, size equals 4 produces a scrollable list with 3 items visible. Buttons. You can define clickable buttons via the button element. Here's the syntax for it. Inside the button element, you can put content like text or images. And here's an example of a multi-page form. You can use the button to move on to the next page. Forms and tables may be combined to create a more professional appearance. For example, aligned edges. As you can see in this example here, the edges of all the text boxes have been aligned. But do note that the same effect may be achieved via CSS as well. And some web designers wrap form controls in lists, either as ordered or unordered lists, as shown in the next example here. We've got an ordered list used to accomplish this. What does this look like on the screen? Okay, this is our example of a visual representation of the final result. Let's take a look at one more example then. This time we have an ordered list and an unordered list. You can probably by now visualize what the end result would look like even before seeing it. But here is the result on the screen. Let's look at one more example, mailing list sign up. Alright, styling forms with CSS. One popular way of creating some style for your forms is using CSS properties. A word of caution here, form controls will appear slightly different in different browsers. You already know, you can probably anticipate that by now already, but it's still worth mentioning. This is partly because they're not strictly web elements. They are elements of the graphical user interface of the operating system. So the operating system displays these controls in whatever visual style is native to the operating system itself. And CSS styling may be applied in different ways to forms in order to brighten their appearance. The example that you see here allows you to, with a style rule such as this one, to align the checkboxes as you see here on the right. Everything is floated to the left, the width is 200 pixels, the text is aligned to the right, and you've set a margin. You can experiment with these and try different numbers, see what works for you. The point being made here is that CSS is a popular tool people use to style their forms. Okay, forms and scripts. We haven't talked about JavaScript yet. This is the most popular way of scripting on the client side using JavaScript. With the availability of JavaScript on web browsers, scripting provides a whole new avenue of ways to use forms. Forms that use browser scripts can process some information immediately and can return the results right to the current web page. Form input data is usually processed on the server, but you can, as we're going to see in the weeks to come, we can use a script written in JavaScript within the web page to do some processing on the client side, and to have the HTML document perform some data validation, for example. If you want to have the data checked for validity or result calculated based on the data without needing anything from the server, you may use a script within the web page to read and process the data. That's what data validation on the client side refers to. This here is an example of a script-only form. It sets the background color of the current web page. And here is the actual result you're going to see on the screen. Okay, this takes us to the HTML5 controls, the new ones. Again, there's a note here. Keep in mind that these are still not supported by all the browsers, especially older versions of some browsers don't support all of these. So this first one here, control that we're seeing, is the new date and time related input type. Okay, I've got 5 examples for you. The first one that you see here creates a data input control, which is a a pop-up calendar for specifying the date, the year, the month, and the day, and the initial value may be provided in the form year, month, day, the one that you see here. Okay, the next one creates a time input control for specifying time, um, hour, minutes, and seconds, and the value may be provided as well. The third one down here creates a combined date type time input control. The value has the date and time format, year dash month dash day, and then hours, minutes, and seconds divided by columns. The fifth one in the list um, creates a date input control specifying a particular month in a year. So we just have the year and the month. And then the last one is really interesting. It creates a date input control for specifying a particular week in a year using an ISO week numbering format, which is year dash and then W followed by the week number. Okay, that's for the date and time controls. Numerical inputs is yet another new type of control introduced in HTML5. The number and the range input types collect numerical data. And here is the syntax for both, as well as an example of how to use them. So the first one sets a minimum and a maximum to 1 and 6. It's going to require that you enter a number that's between those. And then the second one creates a range with a certain step. So the range is 0 to 10 with a step of 1. I encourage you to try this out in your own web pages and see if you like it. Maybe at one point you'll find good use for it. Okay. Next HTML5 control that we're going to see here is called the color selector. You can see in the example the correct syntax, and it's going to open up a color picker for you, and it will allow you to select the color. Continuing with the HTML5 controls, a list of miscellaneous ones. First one here is called progress. The progress element gives users feedback on the state of an ongoing process, such as a file download. It can have a specific end value provided with the max attribute right there, or just indicate that something is happening, such as waiting for a server to respond, for example. And finally, the meter one. Meter indicates the state of an ongoing process. It's similar to progress, but it always represents a measurement within a known range of values, also known as a gauge. It has a number of attributes, min and max, indicate the highest and the lowest values for the range. Low and high could be used to trigger warnings at undesirable levels, and optimum specifies a preferred value. The values would most likely be updated with JavaScript dynamically during the process. And here is an example of how to set up and use a meter. Okay. And that wraps up our discussion on web forms and the web form controls. It was a basic introduction. We're going to see some more, a more detailed one as we progress in the course and as we get to JavaScript. For now, this discussion here shows you the basics of using forms and form controls. We're going to do an exercise with this as well today, and I encourage you to try and experiment with these in your own coding, as they are a very useful tool in your toolbox as you program. Thanks very much. This wraps up our discussion today, and I'll see you next time.